So I think what I would like to get out of you through this conversation is that I think you seem to be playing this game of blockchains quite differently than some of the other teams out there, and would like to focus on your approach specifically with Sei, and how that evolves as the space is evolving. And of course, towards the end, I would also like to touch upon your plans for 2024 coming up. But yeah, why don't you quickly start with a quick introduction about yourself, Sei, and obviously the version 2 of Sei, which is upcoming, seems to be all the rage on Twitter amongst the EVM developer community.
Yeah. So thanks for having me here. For those of you that I haven't met before, my name is Jay, co-founder of Sei. And my story is, as they were mentioning before, I got into crypto initially back in 2017. My roommate at the time, he was going through Binance Labs. And we ended up tinkering on a couple of different projects together. I wrote some smart contracts for the first time. And I mean, it was different. It was different than Web2 development. It was a lot of fun. And afterwards, I ended up joining Robinhood. So I was fairly early over there. I saw the company 10x, and I was an engineering lead when the GameStop saga happened. So I think the previous panelists were talking about GameStop as well. I don't know how closely y'all were following along with it, but it was a complete fiasco. Like, it was handled exceptionally poorly. And for a little bit of context there, what happened is that there were a lot of meme stocks like GameStop that basically started pumping to the moon. And then Robinhood just turned off buys on these stocks. And not only did they turn off buys, they didn't give any kind of reasoning for why they did so. Like, it was kind of just happening last minute, and then customers got really mad. As an insider, you feel incredibly powerless, right? Like, you put your reputation on the line to join a place like Robinhood, and everyone's just hitting you up like, yo man, what the hell is happening internally? Like, you have nothing to be telling them. Your team is asking you questions, people, like your friends are asking you questions, everyone's upset, and you cannot tell them anything. And that really highlighted to me how when you have these centralized systems, there's a complete lack of transparency. It is completely opaque, and you have no idea how decisions are being made. And that's really what made me a decentralization maxi. So originally, what we wanted to do was start off by building something like a decentralized Robinhood. We wanted to build a DEX, and we wanted to build it on-chain. This led to us looking into all the infrastructure that we could use to build it, and this was 2 years ago. And I mean, there were basically it was kind of like a barbell distribution of the types of infrastructure we could build on. On one hand, you had Ethereum and Ethereum L2s. Now, these had EVM, these had the mindshare and the developer resources and good developer experience, but they were not scalable at all. Ethereum L1, I mean, I think all of you are pretty familiar with it, is incredibly expensive to use, and it also doesn't really give you that good performance. It's like 10, 20 TPS, nothing good enough for like building something that is usable by the masses. On the other hand, you had chains like Solana that are really high performance chains. The only issue there is the developer experience was really difficult, and there was also, like, if you are not an EVM chain, you don't have the entire tooling and all of the mindshare that you get from a lot of the crypto native folks coming over. So it was pretty difficult to get started. And I mean, that's what has led to the Sei V2 announcement that we launched, I guess we announced a week ago now. So Sei V2 is going to be basically exploring that design space in the middle between EVM and Solana, where we're building extremely high performance infrastructure, but also having the EVM be a first-class citizen of the chain. So Sei V2 is going to allow Sei to be the first parallelized EVM, and it's going to be launching in public testnet in Q1 of next year.
Interesting. You touched upon performance. I mean, Sei being really high performant, right? And I think if I look at what you folks have done over the past 2 years, you have had some considerable breakthroughs in terms of things like, say, parallel execution, faster consensus, etc. I mean, things that just make blockchain cheaper and faster, right? And that seems to be something that quite a few other teams as well are trying out, like Solana, Aptos Sui are also there, and now even the likes of Monad, who are trying to bring that in EVM compatible environment like Sei V2 as well. Do you really think there is space for so many teams trying to solve a similar problem, or I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on how do you see this evolving in a way that there are so many people trying to make the blockchain faster, cheaper. Are there enough problems to solve, so many people to exist? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal question. So the way that I think about blockchains and just crypto infrastructure in general is you really are only able to get adoption if developers are able to succeed. And there's basically two types of developers in crypto right now. There's crypto native folks, and there's people coming over from Web 2. So for crypto native folks, they're essentially all building on the EVM right now. I mean, there's some teams building in Solana, some teams building in Cosmos, some teams building in Bitcoin, but I mean, majority of the developer activity is happening on Ethereum, either on L2s or on the layer 1 itself. So if you're not catering to those types of crypto native developers, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to get people to launch like applications that are going to be successful in a short-term window. So that's why I'm really bullish on the idea of the intersection of the EVM and high-performance chains, because I think in the next like 6 to 12 months, that has to be the approach that is going to lead to more developer activity happening. I don't think it's going to be an entirely new execution environment. Like I think the technology behind Aptos, Sui is great. I don't think that's going to be the unlock that'll lead to a lot of new like phenomenal applications getting built in the next 6 to 12 months. I think it has to be some kind of intersection between the EVM and high performance chains. Now, with regards to whether it's possible for there to be multiple winners, absolutely. I think we're early enough right now that it's not really fair to say that there's only going to be like one chain that is the winner and the other like 50 are not going to have any activity. I think there's going to be space for a lot of teams to do well. And it's much better to be collaborative and to work together on improving a lot of the technology. I think parallelization, for example, is extremely, extremely young right now. And there's a ton of work we can do to make it better. And I think that's true for a lot of other hard technical problems as well, such as how do we prevent state bloat? How do we optimize state access to be able to get the best possible performance? I think there's a lot of ways for us to be collaborating.
Interesting. While talking about your background in the beginning, you mentioned about, your days at Robinhood especially, and then of course, you probably at some point started off to build an exchange, and eventually, you of course are now running Sei, which has a lot of trading-related optimizations, I would say. And I think in the past as well, you and the entire team has been pretty vocal about saying that, look, trading is probably one of the biggest use cases that has found product market fit in crypto. In terms of the asset, of course, right? I mean, of course, you have a lot more things going on with blockchain. So just curious to know here, how does some of the optimizations you have made focused on trading is really translating to improved experiences for institutions, for traders, for, just people in general, right? And just to add to that, some of these optimizations are something that a lot of these L2s built on top of Ethereum are also, trying to solve. So, would love to first of all understand, how are these optimizations that you have made at Sei translating to, let's say, experience for traders? And do you see a direct competition with what L2s are trying to solve there, or do you think that's a completely different battle, and what you're doing is has a different audience altogether?
Yeah, so maybe let's take a step back. Like, what is Sei's core thesis? Like, what are we trying to do? Internally, we have just one core thesis, which is that the exchange of digital assets is the most fundamental use case for blockchains. Like, every single thing right now on-chain that has found any semblance of product market fit is either directly a trading application or it indirectly gets all of its demand from people that are trying to trade. So like, if you look at things like Uniswap, OpenSea, even StepN, everything that is an exchange or a game, there is some trading component tied to it, and this directly makes it an exchange. If you look at other things, for example, Aave, the reason people would go and borrow money from Aave is to then go and ape it into whatever the current meme coin of the month is, and to try to make money off that. Even MetaMask, for example, like the reason people would install MetaMask is to then go into like Uniswap and trade on chain. So everything is tied to trading. It's also becoming abundantly clear that there's going to be more and more trading activity happening on chain in the future. There's already more adoption happening just from normal users. And on top of that, there's also regulatory pressure on centralized exchanges. And that will lead to some of that centralized exchange activity moving on-chain instead. The question is then, what is preventing this on-chain activity from scaling? And that's where the idea of the exchange trilemma comes in, which is that between capital efficiency, scalability, and decentralization, every exchange that is out there right now has only been able to get 2 of the 3. And we don't think the solution here is to be able to continue iterating on exchange mechanism design. Like, we don't think the solution is to go from Uniswap V2 to V3 to V4. Instead, we think the solution is to do a complete rewrite of the underlying infrastructure to help really tailor-make infrastructure that will give exchanges and trading applications the best type of performance. Now, we don't think this can be built with an L2. One of the fundamental things that exchanges and trading applications need is really, really high performance. And unfortunately, with the way that layer twos that are using Ethereum for data availability work, is they need to write something around the transaction execution that happened on-chain. So most rollups, what they do is they take all the transaction data, they compress it, and then they write that on-chain. And some other rollups, they're starting to experiment with state diffs. So they'll say that, okay, these were the accounts that were updated, and then they still need to write that on-chain. And in both of these cases, the bandwidth of the base layer, the amount of data that you can write, ends up being the bottleneck. So if you do the math here, each byte of data that you write on-chain costs 16 gas. There is a target of 15 million gas per block on Ethereum. So it's roughly around 6K TPS that you can actually have for layer 2 activity if all of the L1 block space is used only for writing this transaction call data. But in reality, there's like people that are using like OpenSea and Blur and Uniswap on the L1. They're all competing for that same block space. Which is why if you look at the historic throughput that has been there with L2s, like the sustained average throughput at max has been like 30 TPS for a 24-hour period for any L2 in existence. 30 TPS is not good enough for the future of trading. So that's why we fundamentally think the only way to get better performance is to be able to build your own L1. And I think that's something that like is generally acknowledged in the industry, that L2s are phenomenal for certain types of things. Like if you want to build a very specific type of application, like let's say you want to build a rollup that is specialized for NFTs. Like one of my friends are building that where they have pre-compiles that are optimized for certain types of NFT trading activity. I think that makes sense. But I think if you're just trying to build the highest performance infrastructure out there, building it as a rollup doesn't really make sense.
Interesting. Makes a lot of sense. I'll switch gears a bit and ask you a couple of questions around V2 specifically. So with V2, of course, you are now embracing the entire EVM ecosystem, right? Of course, you touched upon and said that end of the day, you have to be where the developers are. I mean, they're the life and the blood of the chain. On this, we recently have been seeing a few chains that used to be L1s before, just to embrace EVM compatibility, have started becoming L2s now. Just keen to hear your thoughts on why are you still looking to continue building it as an L1? Have you internally at any point in time even discussed that, hey, what if we move this to L2? Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts around having this whole L1, L2 debacle?
Yeah, that's a fun conversation. So we have definitely considered it internally, whether it makes sense to be building Sei as an L2. As I was mentioning before, there's definitely trade-offs. And the way that I think about it is if you want to build the best infrastructure, you can't have separate components that all need to be interacting with each other. Like with the modular approach, you have a DA layer, a settlement layer, an execution layer. If any of these layers have any kind of performance issues or like liveness issues, then the user experience will both be degraded, and then the overall time to finality will be impacted. They might not be able to do anything at all. So having these different layers allows for faster experimentation. Like you can just create a new execution layer and then not worry about settlement in DA, like someone else can handle that for you. But at the end of the day, each of these different layers has a communication overhead that introduces increased complexity. So if you want to build the highest performance infrastructure, you really need it to be an integrated system. And basically, integrated systems are always going to have a higher upper bound for performance than modular systems, just because with an integrated system, you don't have this additional complexity of these different chains that essentially all need to communicate with each other.
Understood. Just extending that thought of catering to developers specifically, I think Web3 is often accused of suffering with tribalism towards ecosystems, right? You see that a lot on Twitter specifically with around a lot of ecosystems now. So tribalism, do you think it's a necessary evil to retain users and developers, or do you think on a longer run it ends up creating a larger downside where some of the early developers or projects in the space become too large in governance or perception such that it eventually repels the later developers coming into the ecosystem? I mean, what are your thoughts around tribalism? And if you think this is important, just keen to know how has Sei been trying to create the tribalism or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think tribalism is something that, like, if you build any type of successful consumer application, it's unavoidable to have tribalism. If you look at some of the most well-respected Web2 brands, for example, Apple. Apple is has one of the strongest senses of tribalism out there, right? Like, it's insane just how strongly people are Apple aligned. And I think that's true for like anything where people care a lot. If you create something where people feel some type of attachment to what you're building, which is true for basically every successful consumer application, it's unavoidable for there to be a high degree of tribalism. And I think that's a really good thing. I think that leads to people that are really aligned with what is being done. It leads to a community where people are very, very motivated. And it just allows the product to have a stronger type of product market fit than, for example, a SaaS company. Like, people don't really care that much about like what kind of SaaS companies they're using, but like for a lot of Apple products, people are willing to wait like several hours in line to get like be one of the first people to get that iPhone, or one of the first people in line to get that like Nike shoe or something. So yeah, I mean, crypto, I think it's necessary. From Sei's standpoint, we're really just focused on the tech right now. It's not something that we're like trying to have an organized process around to like, oh, we want to like have some type of tribalism and we're going to like set up these specific approaches to facilitate that. Like, really, if you just build the best technology, that allows for developers to build the best applications. And when there's good applications being built, a community gets formed organically, because killer applications lead to people that are happy with these applications, and that's, I think, where strong crypto communities come from.
Interesting. Like, throughout your conversation, you have been focusing a lot around user experience, right? And how performance, experience, everything matters to eventually expand blockchains, get more people there. Taking that a step further, we see a lot of apps now moving to their own app chains in a bit to maybe, let's say, abstract the chain altogether, right? And also do some customizations around speed, fees, finalities, etc., etc. What is your take on this thesis, or I mean, at least the narrative that's being playing out within the ecosystem for the time being? Where do you think that this is where the future will be, where all of the applications will have their own app chains? And if so, do you plan to stay as a general purpose chain, or are you, just maybe exploring that probably enable applications to build on top of Sei as the base stack and let them do their customization? I mean, what's your entire thought around being general purpose versus moving to an app chain scenario?
Yeah. So we strongly disagree with the app chain thesis. If you look at the distribution of layer ones out there, on one hand you have general purpose chains, and on the other hand you have app chains. Both of these extremes have their own benefits. Like app chains, for example, you're able to have very specialized infrastructure that is tailor-made for one specific type of application. So by definition, you're going to have better infrastructure for that type of use case. But the thing about general purpose chains is that you get social coordination. Every single project that is building on that chain, they're all part of the same team, and they all help that ecosystem succeed. Like every project building on Polygon, they are their own independent project, but they all also help the Polygon ecosystem succeed. Same thing for Solana, Ethereum, and every other chain out there. And that makes the process of actually growing that ecosystem substantially easier. And I think that's the biggest difficulty with app chains. Like, there are obviously the technical issues of like, okay, now you need to maintain both the base layer and you need to maintain an application, which are two of the hardest things to do in crypto. You need to do both of them, and it's tough. But overall, we don't think that the app chain approach is going to work as the default for many types of projects. I think there are certain cases where it can work. For example, DYDX V3, it's already its own StarkX rollup. So migrating that to be its own app chain, if there's no composability requirements and it's already isolated from what is happening on the Ethereum base layer, I think that can be an experiment that can work. I think there's going to be a lot of friction to be able to onboard new users onto it, but I think that kind of an approach can work. But for a lot of other type of applications, composability is where they get a lot of their benefits from, like being part of that shared ecosystem where people are able to have atomic transactions that make use of that specific project. And if you just get rid of the composability, I think it's much harder for them to actually scale.
Interesting. Does it also lead to some sort of let's say liquidity fragmentation if you keep on building your own app chains? Is there a way to maybe combat that? What if, let's say, Sei continues to be a general purpose L1, and some people might still come in and say that, look, I really like the stack that you have built. It's very performant. There's probably a thing or two I might want to change and tweak it according to my application, I would still like to build with you. Do you think that kind of scenario playing out where you might want to enable teams to use your stack, or do you think no, it's probably it does more harm than good?
No, I mean, so from an L1 standpoint, it's hugely beneficial if another team is like, your tech is good enough that we're going to bet our entire team's success on the technology that you're building. Like, it leads to a lot more mindshare happening around that technology, which just leads to better open source tech being created. For example, if you look at Solana, right? Like, there's the PIT team that like forked Solana to be able to create their own PIT network. There's talks of, I think it was Maker from a few months ago where they were trying to do something similar. Whenever there's other projects that fork these execution layers, I don't think it ends up being zero sum at all. I think it ends up being very strongly positive sum. I do think what a lot of projects look for, though, is maturity in that high-performance ecosystem. So in Sei's case, I don't think it'll be like, oh, like today there's going to be like 10 projects that are trying to fork the Sei client. But I do think 2 years from now, if the execution side of Sei is able to get that type of performance that really unlocks new use cases, I think it'll be very common for people to do that, and it's a good thing for the ecosystem at large.
Makes sense. Coming to some of the applications, right? Of course, we touched upon trading as one of the use cases that has found good PMF in crypto, and a lot of people trying to optimize the performance for that. But we are often, I mean, as an industry, accused of not having real use cases to solve for, right? And we are just, tech maxis trying to create tech where we do not see a lot of applications being built. Just wanted to get your thoughts on where do you see some of the, I mean, apart from trading, of course, what are some of the areas or use cases that you personally are excited about and you would see developers or even the communities build, either on Sei or on any blockchain, but areas where you really see blockchains playing a role and making something which probably makes the Web2 counterparts, which makes something better than the Web2 counterparts already have?
Yeah, so in general, the way that I think about consumer applications that are being built on chain, I think is identical to how it is in Web 2. And in Web 2, like basically every single type of consumer app that's found product market fit, it falls under some kind of cardinal sin. So like greed, for example. I worked at Robinhood before. I think that the primary reason that Robinhood was successful is because people are going there trading options, like these 0-day expiration options, which are, I mean, it's just honestly complete degenerate gambling. But I think that's like the reason that Robinhood was able to find such strong PMF. It's because it appealed to people that are greedy. I think if you look at social media apps, they're going to appeal to something like envy or like one of those other more like pride or something. And I think the same thing's going to be happening in crypto. Like in order for a consumer application to take off, it really needs to appeal to some kind of primary human emotion. And if it does that, I think it's going to be able to truly find some type of product market fit. With regards to like what crypto uniquely enables that you can't get in Web 2, I think decentralization and trustlessness is the biggest thing. Like as someone that worked at Robinhood before, I think being able to trust or needing to trust whoever you're interacting with, that puts you in a spot where you are completely powerless. And if you do have these systems where there's like no trust requirements at all, I think that does vastly improve the user experience.
Interesting. Fair enough. I have a couple more questions before we let you go, of course. One is around, so I mean, of course, it's an extension of what you have recently announced with Sei V2 as well, right? Embracing the EVM developers community, enabling those developers to build on top of Sei. Just wanted to get a good overhaul of how exactly are your, like what exactly is your strategy to, get some of the developers and the community to start building on top of Sei. I think they say that while tech of course needs to be good and differentiated, that still is half the problem solved, right? You still need to get developers and builders to build on top of it. So as a team, what exactly is your strategy? How do you look at it? I'm assuming the entire thing around Sei V2 is definitely a big move towards realizing that some strategy of onboarding developers and increasing the top of the funnel. But I would like to get your views on how does Sei strategize this entire ecosystem building, developer ecosystem building, onboarding, etc.
Yeah, so I'm at Sei Labs. We're purely focused on the technology. Sei Foundation does a lot more thinking around the go-to-market, but I can share some of the insights that I've seen from how they've approached it. In general, it seems like L1s are publishers. Like if you look at games, There's gaming publishers that you would work with in order to be able to get your game built and then distributed to users. And these distribution pipelines are really what L1s enable. Like, the core thing that developers want is to be able to get adoption of their product. Like, user acquisition is the main thing that makes them successful. And if you help them with user acquisition, that is going to be the strongest selling point for them. I candidly don't think it's grants that are going to result in people coming on and staying for a long time. It's people will stay on in your ecosystem if that's the best place for them to get user adoption. So that's the biggest thing that the Sei Foundation is focused on. Like, how do you set up the right pipelines to be able to get the greatest amount of distribution channels and the easiest time for developers to get started and start getting users? I think Sei V2 is going to be very helpful from this entire front. When you do have a parallelized EVM, like the way that we're approaching with Sei V2 is going to be fully EVM bytecode compatible. So you can take contracts that already exist and deploy them with no code changes at all. The benefit here is, I mean, obviously you don't need to make any code changes, but then you're able to get more than 30 TPS in any kind of EVM type environment. That allows you to experiment much faster and try building new types of applications as well. So we think this is going to enable entirely new types of use cases.
Interesting. You mentioned about going out, getting a distribution of users, developers, etc. Right? In terms of users, do you think about institutional users differently than retail? I mean, as somebody who has founded and running a chain, do you start by saying that, look, this is my audience, I want to cater to retail or institutions? Want to open it up for the audience to see what exactly is your thought process, right, when you think about getting distribution. Is it retail focused, is it institution, or is it alike for everybody?
Mm-hmm. I think there ends up being a few different steps of adoption. When you come up with a new ecosystem, the first people in that ecosystem are the airdrop farmers. It's the people that are super crypto native, that are there probably not because they believe in the tech, but because they're there for the opportunity that they see in that. Then afterwards, you start having applications get built. This leads to normal people coming on. So the second group of people is just normal users. And I think only after there's some terminal amount of normal users, that's when you start seeing institutions wanting to come on. And the interesting thing about institutions is you can build infrastructure that is tailor-made for institutions, but they're not going to come on unless there's actual retail adoption of that specific type of platform. So in the way that we think about building Sei, it's all about improving the developer experience and the retail user experience. Institutions are going to come on anyway if that's been built in a good way. So trying to optimize for institutions isn't like one of the top few things to be focusing on at all.
Got it. Interesting. Jay, this has been a wonderful chat. I have just one more question to get your thoughts to leave us all with. First of all, like, what are your plans going into 2024 for Sei, especially with the market that seems to be coming back to some extent? And if you can probably extend that to talking about what is the end game for Sei, right? I'm sure. I mean, it might be too early to probably be thinking about end games and seeing out how the idea maze plays. But yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on how do you see it evolving? Where do you see Sei probably ending up 2 years, 4 years, probably a decade from now? And we can definitely start with talking about what are your plans moving into 2024 at least.
So I'll say we've done a good job building Sei if 5, 10 years from now, there's no difference between deploying an application on Sei and deploying it on an AWS server. Right now, there's a massive disconnect between the Web 2 experience and the Web 3 experience. Like, doing things on Web 3, it's incredibly clunky. I'm sure most of you just hate doing a lot of things like bridging, for example. It's one of the most mind-numbing experiences in the world. We want there to be absolutely no delta between the two of these things. And I mean, that's how we're thinking about the infrastructure that we're building. We want to keep iterating on every single part of it. For example, finality matters a lot in terms of like latencies and the user experience around that. Throughput matters a lot in terms of both gas costs and the type of applications that are offered. So that's the end goal that we're going towards. And I mean, yeah, if we're able to succeed there, blockchains do end up being environments where certain ones have more activity happening than others. So it does end up becoming kind of a magnet for activity if there's good infrastructure that you end up building. And in terms of the near-term focus point, from Sei Labs side, we're purely focused on shipping Sei V2. There's been a ton of work that we've been doing since, I guess, the mainnet launch happened in August of this year to get ready for that. So there will be a lot more announcements around that and a lot more, I think, avenues for the community to get involved as well.
Awesome. Jay, this was really good. Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you so much everybody for joining. Would request you to give a round of applause for Jay, definitely. And all the best with everything coming up, especially Sei V2. I'm sure there's a lot of excitement going around, and I'm personally excited as well. But yeah, thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for being here, and have a good rest of the conference.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Anshu.
Thank you, Jayendra. Thank you so much for your time.